Hear me, we've heard of Danish heroes, ancient kings, and the glory they cut for themselves, swinging mighty swords. How Shield made slaves of soldiers from every land, crowds of captives he'd beaten into terror. He'd traveled to Denmark alone, an abandoned child, but changed his own fate, lived to be rich and much honored. He ruled lands on all sides. Wherever the sea would take them, his soldiers sailed, returned with tribute and obedience. There was a brave king. That is the opening lines from Beowulf, translated by Burton Raffell. Now, first and foremost, I love this cover. This is a wonderful cover. This is the Signet Classics. It's got, a short introduction in there and a short afterword in there and a little bit of a glossary of names and stuff. But for the most part, you are getting the majority of this text as Beowulf. They aren't wasting a whole bunch of space in here. The entirety of the book is 150 pages long. Yeah, 150. And a good chunk of that is Beowulf. And the reason why it takes up a bigger chunk than most translations is because of a decision they made. See, they broke it into chapters. So this chapter starts on 320 and ends on line 370. So that's a 50-line chapter. So every chapter ends up being about 2 to 4 pages. Every once in a while there's a 4, usually 2 to 3. And so it breaks it down. So this is all written in poetic verse, mostly. It's not prose, but it doesn't really have a rhythm, a rhyme scheme, a pattern to it. But it is in verse form. And what Raffell does here is different than the other two we've talked about. So Tolkien, in his translation, first and foremost, was not writing it for publication. He was translating for his own use. And so almost guaranteed what Tolkien is trying to do is to be as accurate as he can, because he's a philologist. He is obsessed with words and their meanings. So he's trying to be accurate more than retaining the feel and flow of Beowulf, even though some of it still seeps through there in his prose translation. He's trying to make a readable copy that is accurate in its approach. The Michael Alexander translation that is in the Penguin Classics took a different approach. It is in poetic verse, and it attempts to translate poetically to keep the same kind of pattern mostly to the poetic form. And so it has a lot of the alliterative verse still seeping through it. And Burton Raffell takes a third approach, a very different approach. He looks at this and says, I'm going to translate it, sure, but I'm also going to take some liberties. I'm going to tweak things to make it more like a readable novel, so to speak, in terms of the action. The gist is still there. It's still very much intact. The entire story is in there, but you'll see the occasional slipping in of nuance of words to round out a thought that, if you look at other translations, aren't really there. I find this to be an interesting approach. This is not the same approach as, let's say, the Maria Devana Headley translation that came out a couple years ago that was taking a very liberal approach at modernizing Beowulf, putting in words like #blessed and translating the opening word as bro to imitate a bunch of cowboys sitting around at a bar telling stories. There's none of that going on here. And I kind of like it, surprisingly. I'm not a Beowulf purist by any means. I love this poem. I've read it many, many times over the years. And I've almost finished reading it the 4th time this month, which will probably be the last time I read it this year. Although you never know. And I find this one to be a really, really interesting one. If you are looking for Beowulf, to encounter it for the first time, I am almost tempted to say that this is a great starting point because of its readability, and the decision to make it into chapters makes it really, really easy to break it up across multiple readings. If you, for instance, don't usually sit down and read 100 pages straight of poetic verse, it makes it real easy to jump in and out because it is broken down in a way into little bits and pieces in a way that I never would have considered and have never seen before. This was easily, of the first three, the fastest read, the most enjoyable read. Significant difference. Tolkien's was an enjoyable read, but very slow going, because he was not trying to make it a readable copy. He was, making it primarily for himself. And as I've said before, I think his translation would have been extremely different if he had been making one knowing it was going to be published somewhere for other people to read. It would look nothing like the version of Beowulf we have of his translation. The Michael Alexander is one that does some really good things, really strong things, interesting things, but is not nearly as readable as this one. It's a step up from Tolkien. But this is a really good one. We'll see where I land. I don't think this is going to dethrone the Haney translation in terms of the all-around benefits of that translation, the enjoyment, what Haney brings is very different than what Raffell brings. But I can understand completely why this was the go-to translation for many, many, many years. I'm so glad I had it and that I finally read it, because this was a good experience. This was very, very enjoyable. And if you have not read Beowulf yet and you see a copy of this, I have no hesitation in giving a very strong recommendation to pick it up. This copy was $4.95. This is well worth that and could be read cover to cover in an afternoon if you wanted to sit down. You could even skip the introduction and the afterword and just read the poem in the middle, and you'll still have a really good time with it. So there we go. I wanted to make a short, quick video. Sorry it took so long. I'm behind, and as we've seen from Micah's own channel, it's a struggle to find that time, the balance of, okay, well, I could make a video, but if I make a video, then that means I'm not reading. I want to read right now, so I've been choosing the last couple nights to read rather than make a video, and I have no apologies for that. But stay tuned. I hope to still this weekend get to the Haney translation, but more importantly, to do a weekend reading report at some point in time. So I will catch you later.